So now start the recording because welcome, Erin Connor. We are all finally logged in, all set, volume ready.
Awesome. So I'll just do a quick little recap of what I said. So I'm Erin Connor. I own my own business. It's called The Retro Collective Co. And you can find me at theretrocollectiveco.com is my website. So my main thing that I do is resin jewelry, and I do it with pressed flowers and leaves. But I am a crocheter as well. So if you've seen me on here before, it was for the crochet lesson that I did. But yeah, so today we're talking about resin. So for the flowers, I do source a lot of my flowers because the pressing and drying process takes about 3 to 4 weeks, and it can be a little bit difficult. So I do source a lot of my flowers. I try to source them from small businesses so that I'm optimizing my materials and able to get like a fast enough turnover of jewelry, because if I was pressing them on myself, I wouldn't be able to sell as much, basically. Yeah, so today what I'm going to show you guys is pretty much the step-by-step process of how I do it. I will say it does require quite a bit of materials, especially if you're doing it on a large scale. You have to invest in some things that are good for your safety, because resin is a toxic material. It does create toxic fumes, which obviously you don't want to be breathing in all the time. You can see in my computer screen one with my face, you can see this is my fume box right here. So I got this on Amazon. It's actually for spray painting, and I try not to buy from Amazon, but it's the only place I can find this thing. So I put my resin pieces in here when they're drying for the night, and it's supposed to help suck some of the toxic fumes outside while you're working on stuff. So you have to have a way to funnel it outside. So if I can lift my phone up and detach it from here, this is my window outside, and I have the hose funneled in there and then a bunch of towels stuffed in there to keep it from getting super cold in here. But yeah, so that's something that I do for my safety because I do this a lot. If you're doing it on a smaller scale, or if you're able to do it outside, that's better as well. But obviously you can't do that right now in this weather. So yeah, that's kind of how I keep myself safe. I do wear a mask when I'm working on my resin. Ideally, you should use a respirator mask. I just use a medical mask because my whole glasses situation, I wear prescription glasses. I can't, they fog up so easily with a respirator mask. So the fact that I'm doubling up on the two things makes me feel a little better about that. And then another safety thing while I'm going over materials quick is gloves. I highly recommend wearing gloves when you use resin because it is a chemical and it's a skin irritant, and it's very sticky as well. So getting it off of your fingers before it's dried is very difficult. So I use just latex gloves, the powder-free kind. And then if you can try to get ones that fit your hands pretty well so that you're not fumbling with your stuff, it'll make things a lot better. I'm actually going to keep these off for right now to show you the other materials you need. So here is my list of materials you need for the resin process. If you look at my iPhone screen. So first off, we start with epoxy resin. So I do not use UV resin. I do not find it effective at all. Some people use it and do really well with it, but it is not very high quality, and it's not really gonna last very long. Also, UV resin, whenever I've tried to use it, you have to cure it with light, and using light with pressed flowers and leaves can cause fading. So it's they kind of clash with each other, the flowers and the UV resin. So I've seen some businesses that do that and they turn out great, but I've just never had success with it. The only thing I use UV resin for is to connect little studs on the back of my pieces, and that's it, because I don't really like working with it at all. So the things you need for resin mixing, you need mixing cups. I actually get, since I use not a ton at a time, I actually get these little medicine cups that you get with like drinkable medicine, and I just get them in bulk. Another Amazon buy that I unfortunately can't find anywhere else. And then I also have stir sticks for mixing the resins, basically like popsicle sticks. Kind of skipping a little bit. So we talked about the face mask, wax paper. So I use wax paper to protect my surface of my, if you look at my iPhone screen, of my fume box. So just to keep things from dripping and getting things messy. If you have a table you're working on that you don't want to completely ruin, wax paper works great for the table as well. This is forever my craft table, so I just work straight on the table and it gets messy and it's fine. So I don't really care. It's a thrifted table that I just dedicate to crafting. So if that's the case, you can do that as well. So where do I want to go next? Sorry, going back up here, I have packing tape, which I will talk about. It's basically how I adhere my brass findings on the back. So I'll stick my metal findings that I use to encapsulate the resin and the flowers. I'll use the packing tape for that. And I'll just show you real quick. I'll do this with just one piece so I can show you. And then I'll go through a better step-by-step process. So going down to, we talked about the flowers and leaves. I'll go back up to heat gun in a second, but the brass findings. So this is how I do my resin jewelry. You may have seen resin jewelry as well, where they use silicone molds. That's basically how the resin keeps its shape. You've probably seen that before, and I've actually made pieces like that in the past. I don't really think the look is as nicely finished, so I started using the metal findings instead because I think it adds a more expensive look to it without actually creating that much more of a price on your finished product, because you can get these at like wholesale price and you can find a bunch of different shapes and stuff. So I don't really think it limits your options at all as opposed to using the silicone molds. So getting into that, I'm going to scoot this over. So I just have a piece of muslin cloth so you guys can see what I'm doing really nicely just to have a stark background. So this is my packing tape. I always like to be careful because when you pull packing tape off, you're not going to be able to see this, but you get fingerprints on it. And so I like to look at my packing tape as I'm doing it because sometimes you get like streak marks from where you pulled on it and stuff. So I like to be careful where I place it. So I have a finger mark right here from when I tore it off. And then I'm just going to place it so that it doesn't get into that part. And then I just like to press it down. It doesn't take a lot. And so that's basically how I back my piece, because if you didn't have a backing, just got a question.
What brand of epoxy resin do you like most? And what are your thoughts on the brand Art Resin?
I've never used Art Resin. I know what you're talking about. I use Amazing Crystal Clear is what it's called. And I apologize, it's not super accessible in this frame. So I'm going to show you here. It's got like goo all up on this side. So I just have it sitting in a Ziploc baggie to keep myself protected.
What's it called again?
So it's called Amazing Clear Cast Resin.
Amazing.
And so the epoxy resin is going to come in 2 parts. So that is why you need the mixing cups so that you can, yes, Amazing Clear Cast Resin, so that you can get accurate proportions when you're mixing, because it has to be as exact as possible 1-to-1 ratio. So it is a little finicky if you are not pouring exact, so you want to be like as precise as possible. I really like this brand. This is the only one I've ever used and I've never strayed from it. It's supposed to certain brands of resin can have yellowing effects over time where the resin turns like a yellowish tone, like a sepia tone. And this one is supposed to be non-yellowing. And then later on in the class, I'll talk about like jewelry care to keep pieces from yellowing over time. But this one is meant to avoid yellowing in general. I've never used art resin, so I don't really have a good answer for that. I'm sure as long as it's like a poor resin, it's probably fine. You might just want to look into the yellowing effects. About the low odor and fumes. Yeah, I guess it just kind of depends like on your sense of smell. Like I'm very sensitive to smell and it gives me headaches. So I guess just like always wearing a mask, even if it is low odor, I wouldn't trust it because the fumes can be like pretty toxic if you're breathing them in consistently. So yeah, even with low odor, I would still wear a mask personally. But yes, so where was I? So yes, basically put this piece on here to back it, because if you're pouring the resin in here and it doesn't have any backing, your resin's not gonna stay in your piece. So this is how you keep it encapsulated in here while it's curing. And resin does take, certain brands are different. They like to say, give yourself 24 hours at least. I have had times where I try to like mess with my pieces before 24 hours and it can like kind of warp it, especially because you're using packing tape on the back. If you're using silicone molds, it might be a little bit different, but since you're using, for what I do, I use packing tape on the back. If I'm like tearing the packing tape off before it's like completely set, it can kind of like warp it. So you have to be careful about not giving yourself like the full 24 hours. Sometimes I know what I can get away with just because I've been doing it for a long time now. But yeah, definitely 24 hours is like, and then sometimes depending on like the temperature in your room that you're working in, it might be more, it might be less. So I want to say like intense heat is not good for, so if you're working in like a really hot room, that's probably not great. I work in a pretty cold room because it's in the basement and I have to funnel out of a window where I can't insulate very well. Extreme cold, basically like extreme temperatures aren't great. So I haven't done a ton of work with resin here yet, but I'm probably going to get a space heater to kind of warm it up. Anyway, yes. So I think I got through all of these. Oh, the heat gun. I use a heat gun to pop air bubbles. I apologize, I have my phone plugged in just so I can keep a charge while we're talking. So I use a heat gun. They're not super expensive. I think this one was like $25, and it helps pop the air bubbles. You want to try your best to not create a ton of air bubbles when you're mixing resin, but sometimes it just happens. And I use a heat gun with every batch of resin that I do. And I'll show you this when we're doing it. You want to be careful not to get the heat gun too close to the packing tape, because obviously it's plastic and you can melt it. So that's one tricky thing with using this style of resin creating. You have to be careful in a lot of elements of the steps. Okay. I think I covered most of that. I'll get back up to this. Just some optional things. I'll show you guys tonight how I create colored resin pieces. So here is an example of a colored resin earring that I make. So it has little leaves in there. You can see it has a green background. So you can use different things to color your resin. I use acrylic paint and it gives you a really nice opaque look. You do have to use quite a bit of paint to get it like pretty opaque, which is the look that I like. You can also do less paint to get more of a transparent look. And I promise we are going to get to it very soon. I know I'm kind of talking at you a lot here. So that's kind of that look here. So I'll use paint for that, and I'm gonna mix like a navy-ish tone tonight. And then you can also use like glitter and stuff. I've used mica powder as well to get, to mix in with the acrylic paint to get a glittery look. So that's an option as well. This is like kind of optional. It's depending on how careful you are during the process. I like to use a head pin in case I get any fuzzies or any unwanted things in my resin. I have a dog that has black hair. So a lot of times if I'm working with resin, I'll notice that I'll get like fuzzies. I also shed. So like, that's probably the one thing with resin that is always like my big frustration, is getting things in my pieces once it's dried, because then you can't get it out very well because it's dry. So you have to sand it out, but then you have to do another layer of resin. So I digress. But yeah, so I use a head pin to do that. You could also use a tweezers. You're definitely going to ruin your tweezers. So I recommend just like, I don't know, like I just have these for jewelry making. So if I lose it, I just grab a different one. And then, so for pieces that I have that are really big, I've done, I don't actually have any examples for you guys right now. But if I do big hoops with big flowers in them, my packing tape isn't wide enough for it. So what I'll do is, my packing tape, I think, is like less than 2 inches wide. So what I'll do is I'll take a sheet protector from like my binder, and then I'll cut it up, and then I'll use E6000 to glue it down to the sheet protector, so that I have a way of making sure it stays on the sheet, but that I'm still able to peel it off. So I found that sheet protectors work pretty great, and then the packing tape works well. I've tried wax paper before for like peeling it off, and it does not come off. So you're stuck with wax paper on your resin. So you might be able to get it to work, but I haven't in the past. So wax paper I just use as like a base for keeping my space clean. And then back to some other things. These are more so the small scissors I use to, I think I actually dropped it here earlier. I use this if I have any flowers that I want to cut. So sometimes I'll use half a flower with like a different design, or like with these ferns that we're going to use tonight. I usually only use like tiny little itty bitty pieces of them, because for jewelry, you can't really use like huge flowers and leaves. So I'll usually cut pieces up, and it's a great way to utilize your flowers and leaves. So that's what that is for. The other things are more so for cleanliness. So I wear paint clothes when I do this, because I've ruined clothes before. If you spill on yourself with the resin, it is not going to come out. From my experience, I've tried to clean it out and it doesn't work. So I wear paint clothes. Yeah, just like something you're not super attached to, I would say. And then actually I'm going to take my hat off. If you have long hair, I recommend putting it up so you're not getting your hair in, because like I said, that's really tricky when that happens. So you want to do what you can to avoid it. So I put my hair up and back into a bun. And I think that is it. So now we can actually get into it. I know that's a lot of stuff. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? Feel free to chime in, unmute yourself, or write it in the chat.
I don't know. I think you've got us all in anticipation here.
Yes, I know. I talked a lot.
No, you were all ready. So I'm very excited.
Okay.
Safety first, always.
Yes. Want to make sure we're considering safety, and especially like for me, I have such dry skin. So like when I get resin on my hands, it is a nightmare. And actually, sorry, I'm gonna show you one last thing for supplies that I found. It's in my other room, so I'll be right back. If I have any painters in the group, this is, if I do, it is bound to happen every once in a while, you'll get resin. I can sometimes get it on my forearms. I try to wear long sleeves if I can, but if you do get resin, this is my go-to. It's like the pumice soap. It is very abrasive, so definitely put on lotion afterwards. So it has like tiny, tiny little pieces of pumice in it that's supposed to exfoliate. So it's also used for like paint as well, but it works pretty well for resin. So yes, last supply if you're really interested. Yes, and then I will get into it. So I'm gonna get some stuff out of the way. And I'll try to talk loud. I have to have a mask on. And then I'm actually not going to turn my fume box on today because it gets really loud. So this is how loud it is.
I can't hear it.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, but yeah, we don't hear the box, or I don't hear. So do what you need to do.
Okay. Let me know if it gets too loud because I think it sounds really loud, but I don't want to be screaming at you. So actually, before I put my gloves on, I'm going to put my pieces on the tape. So I find it's easier to do that without your gloves on because otherwise the gloves stick to the tape really badly. So now I am really focusing here. I have my brass findings. All right, so now I'm just gonna put these guys on tape real quick. And then if you do wanna like utilize your tape really well, if I cut off too big a piece sometimes, I'll use an X-Acto knife to cut my tape down the center so that I'm not wasting tape. And then also I find if you take really long pieces of tape and try to put a bunch on them, your tape won't lay very flat. So you want to try and take small pieces. Like this one, I'll probably put 2 down here. And then again, we want to inspect our tape because I have a little fuzzy on it here actually that I don't want to get into. Have my piece down here. I'm just going to cut off the excess. And then I'm just going to throw that piece of tape away because it had a fuzzy on it that you probably couldn't see. Pretty small. So yeah, I have 2 pieces on here. And that's usually about as many as I like to have on a piece. And then I'm actually going to cut this piece down too that I did before. You guys still hear me okay? Okay. And then I especially like to do this when I'm working on a lot of pieces at once. So I try to optimize the space in my fume box. So if I'm working on a huge batch and I have all this extra tape just hanging out, the pieces like to stick together as I'm working. And that is also a nightmare. So I try to keep them from touching in my box. So they're on their own piece of tape and they're not touching. That's more so for me because like when I go to pour the resin and if the pieces move and all that and they like stick together, it's, yeah. kind of a mess. Got this piece that I'll make a pair of earrings with these teardrops here. These are always a simple style that people like. And I'll just press down on them, make sure the tape is nice and secure. I like to do a little press without getting my finger in there because of course we don't want our fingerprints. But also you want to make sure you like tap down on it because if the resin seeps under the tape, it's basically game over. You have to start over on the piece. It won't want to like stick back down on the tape after resin gets in it. And I'll do these ones as well. These ones are kind of cool. They're like a hammered little circle pendant, or oval pendant, I should say. These on one. Set that in my fume box. So I do all my pouring in the fume box. And I had this piece here. So a lady actually asked for a custom pair of earrings that I'm just gonna work on with you guys tonight because might as well make stuff that I actually need to make. And I'll put the other one on here. And I actually do want to show you guys how I do my colored pieces. So I'm going to get 2 more for a pair of earrings real quick. Just have my pieces hanging out here. So I have these circles here that I'll do painted resin or colored resin in for you guys. These ones, I like to just put one on a piece of tape. Put it in there. So this part actually takes a lot longer than you think, planning out what you're all gonna make and how it fits into the box. So I find that this is actually what takes me the longest, is planning out my pieces, and then actually pouring them doesn't take quite as long. Especially getting out all the flowers as well and knowing which ones I want to put in the pieces I'm working on. That can kind of get a little time consuming. So what I'm going to do here next is I'm going to pour the resin, and then I'm going to take my gloves off, and then we'll work on getting out the flowers that we want. This might seem a little backwards. Resin likes to sit for like a solid 5 minutes before you use it. So it has a little bit of time for air bubbles to pop naturally. Otherwise it gets like a ton of air bubbles. It can be just like a little too runny to work with. So I'm gonna do that so that we're utilizing time properly and efficiently. Actually, I'm just gonna pour right on here. That's fine. Just scrap fabric. All right, so I've got my mixing cup. It's kind of hard to see. This one goes up to 30 milliliters. I'm not gonna mix a ton. I usually, for a large batch, I'll mix like 20 milliliters because a little goes a really long way with these pieces. I'll probably mix only 10 milliliters for today, just so I'm not wasting. but so that we have enough to do any other things that people want to see with questions. And then I actually am, if we have time, going to show you guys. So these guys are ginkgo leaves here, and they're on my website right now, the ginkgo leaf collection. So these are ones that I press myself. And then I actually do a different style with these ones where I do a frameless style. So I basically paint resin onto the leaf and then let it dry like that. So it doesn't go into any metal outline or anything, because I kind of like the look of it just being like hanging like that. So that's a slightly different technique. And I'll show you guys that at the end, because in order to do that, your resin has to be very thick. It doesn't want to be super runny, otherwise the painting will be a total mess, and you don't want that. All right, another glove on. Got my stirring stick. And I actually reuse these all the time. I clean them off at the end of my session because I'll just wipe it on my glove because the glove gets thrown away. So I reuse these sticks for multiple batches. And let me see how I want to do this. All right, so first, I've got my side A, Amazing Clear Cast. So this is part A. So since I'm going to do 10 milliliters, I'm going to only pour 5 milliliters of part A. I know it sounds like very little, but I promise you it goes a long way. I'm going to pour into here. Also be careful you don't have a ton of stuff like laying under your table, because sometimes if you spill, like if you have a nice rug or something, you don't want that. This part's gonna be a little boring because you kind of have to wait for it to settle. So if you guys have any questions, just holler. It can be really easy to over pour, so you want to take it slowly.
Erin, do you do several layers for a piece?
Sometimes, yes. You definitely can. It'll take you longer because then you have to wait the 24 hours each time. When I do colored pieces, so you can see on this guy, the color is like a background and then the leaves just sit on top. So in this case, I let the color dry first, and then I have to wait to put the leaves on top, and then I'll put a clear coat on top of that. Because if you just put the leaves into the green, it's gonna sink in, and it's not gonna give you like, it's not gonna give you this type of look, if that makes sense. My goal with just clear pieces is to always just do it one and done. So I have this piece here. This is a little clear pendant with a pansy in it. And usually this, if I do a good job of pouring, it'll only take me one time. Say you get like a fuzzy or something in it, or like a hair, and you have to sand it out, then unfortunately it'll mess up the look of your resin. And then you have to do another pour, another layer on top. Yeah, but usually with the clear, I try my best to just to optimize time, because, you know, the more layers I do, the more the cost of the product is. So something like this, a pair of these just with like a little earring hook, I charge $26 for. Also, of course, you're including the time that you're doing it, but it also is time consuming because you can't just like work on your pieces right away because you have to wait 24 hours for things to dry. So a lot of times customers will ask me like, hey, how long does a piece take you? And I'm like, well, I can't really give you a good answer to that because the assembly doesn't take that long, but I'm waiting a day for things to dry. So does that answer your question and some?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And I actually, now that I let it settle, I have 5 milliliters in there. So for this brand, the part A is going to be really thick. So it takes a little bit for it to settle. And then part B is going to be much more runny. So it doesn't take quite as much time to settle. That being said, it can be really easy to over pour with the runny stuff. So I'm going to be careful. And I apologize, I don't have a better angle for you guys to see this. If you do ever pour too much than you wanted, the nice thing about resin is as long as you're not like mixing it together, you can pour it back in. A lot of times it's harder to do once you've poured the top layer, obviously, but if you pour too much for your first layer or your part A, you can just scoop it up and put it back in the bottle. And I've done that. I do that almost every time I do a resin batch because I get impatient. And then if you do over pour on the top layer, you have to be very careful as not to mix while you're getting the resin out. All right, I think I've got enough in there. Of course, I go really fast when I'm mixing and my bottles get really messy. How precise do I need to be? Sorry, I'm just looking at the messages here quick. As precise as you can. So very much like I look at, I feel like we all learn this in science, like the meniscus. So if you're going based on like the meniscus, like, I don't know, like very accurate, I would say. So I can show you. So I've got 5 milliliters, and I've got 5 milliliters up here. So it's very accurate. And be consistent. So if you're looking at like the bottom of the meniscus, do that consistently. If you're looking at the top, do the top again. Does that make sense? Especially with the medicine cups, these ones have the markings on them, so it's much easier to be accurate. If you have a cup that doesn't have markings, it's going to be kind of hard to get accurate measurements. And then, sorry, the question before that, I've never done the microwave pressed flowers before. I don't really have a good answer for you for that. When I press flowers, I just put them in a notebook and I let times for like tabletops, and you're mixing a ton. You're mixing like a ton at once. In that case, maybe use the scale, but since I have measurement markings on here, I just go by that, and I find it works really well. If you don't have markings on your measurement cup, then yeah, that would be a good way to do that. All right, so I'm gonna start mixing. Looks like someone commented that the microwave technique works well, so maybe give it a shot. I've never done it. So I've used the pressing technique, and I've used the silica powder technique. The only thing with silica powder is that it's going to keep the form of the flour, whereas for what I do, I want my pieces really, really flat. So the silica doesn't always give you the optimized look. In the microwave, could potentially, as long as it's keeping your pieces flat. But if it's curling your edges and stuff, then you might not want to do that for this type of project. Or if you do it, you press it afterwards, because you want really flat pieces so that they fit in the metal findings. Because as you can see, the metal findings aren't very wide. They are very narrow. So you want a really, really well-pressed piece of greenery. All right, so I'm mixing it now. Sometimes I get impatient and I mix really fast. You want to try your best not to mix super fast to avoid air bubbles. And so I'm just taking along and I'm mixing. Important things to do are to scrape the sides, and then make sure you're mixing all the way to the bottom and getting in those corners. Because I've had, if you don't do a good job of mixing, you can get bad batches of resin. And let me tell you, it is heartbreaking. So do a good job of mixing. And you will hopefully be pleased with your final look. All right. And unfortunately, you're going to be watching me mixing for a little bit because you're supposed to mix really, really well. If you see any sort of cloudiness in the resin, you know that it's not fully mixed yet. Here, let me hold it a little differently so you can see. Yeah, I say mixing for like a solid 5 minutes is usually good. Just keep repeating, getting the edges and the sides and the bottom. And you can kind of let it fall to see what the what am I trying to say? What the color is, like if it's cloudy at all or if it's clear. No matter what you do, I feel like it's really hard not to get air bubbles. So that's why we have our heat gun. If you're more patient than I am, then you might have less air bubbles. And if you do decide to use paint, always put in the paint after you've mixed the resin. Do not put it in before you've mixed. Because this way you'll get a well-mixed resin, and then you add the paint and mix that in well. So that has to be a two-step process. Otherwise, I don't think it would turn out very well. As you can see, I'm speeding up here a little because I'm impatient. Do as I say, not as I do. Make sure to scrape this so you're not wasting resin. You're getting it all back in there. All right, so I'm gonna let that sit for a second and then we can pick out our flowers, which is the fun part. So I'm gonna take my gloves off for this. I haven't gotten them super dirty yet, so I don't feel bad about putting them back on. There. So these are the pieces I thought we could work with today. I have that lady who wants a pair of fern earrings. We're going to use some of these little ferns in here. So these are the packets that they come in when I buy them and source them. So they're nice and organized. I can grab a piece. Use this itty bitty fern here. And then I just use my fingernails sometimes to get off any unwanted excess. But like I said, you can use the scissors as well. So this is just a beauty scissors that I've dedicated to resin because it's covered in resin now. So I'm just going to cut off a little frond here. Cut off the little stem. And that's what I'm going to use. So it can also be really easy to misplace your pieces. So I try to like have them set nicely before they go in the resin. Have them kind of organized how I want. Put this back in its home. Here are some other ones. I've got these cute little aster flowers. We're going to use 2 of those for a pair of earrings. I know this might seem a little gross, but sometimes it can be hard to pick up the flowers, so I'll lick the tip of my finger and do that to pick it up. And sometimes you get petals in your mouth and it's yummy. So of course, since these are real flowers and leaves, you want to be extra careful as not to like, I don't know, manhandle them. You want to be careful, which is why I use the licking my finger method because I find it's easier and I don't crumple them. Use this one here. These are itty bitty pansies that we're going to use for a pair of earrings. And I have a few of these fern fronds left for another pair that someone custom ordered from me. I'm just gonna pull those off gently. And I think that's all we need for now. Anyone have any questions? Do you ever overmix, or is that even possible? Yes. Sometimes if I have a batch that I'm working on, it can be really hard to estimate how much resin you need. You're kind of just going based off of experience. experience, and really like a little does go a long way. So the smallest markings on the resin little mixing cups I have is 2.5 milliliters. So the smallest amount you can ever mix is 5 milliliters. So you have to double that because it's 2 parts. So 5 milliliters is the smallest you can mix. I would probably not recommend mixing less than 10 milliliters because when you have such small itty bitty markings, it can be hard to be really accurate with your proportions. So
Erin, don't you think the question is about like you mixed it too long? Like when you say I didn't mix it enough, it wasn't clear. I think the question is you mixed it too long and like compromised it by stirring too much.
I don't think so. So yes, sorry. I was reading the question.
That's okay.
Yes, so not really. I will say that resin has, it's called a working time. So if it gets too thick and it gets really hard to pour, your resin might be done. So, so usually they say, I think for this brand, it's like 40 minutes working time. So if you're mixing a ton and working on a ton of pieces, you have about 40 minutes to make that all happen from when you finish mixing. Yeah, other than that, I don't know that it's possible to over mix. Like you're just gonna, I like still mix it throughout the process. Like if I have a few pieces that I've worked on, I'll mix it again, then start it again. I don't know that it's really possible to over mix. The thing that I would say is if you're past your working time and you're still mixing it and it's super hard to mix, you might kind of just, unfortunately, it might go to waste and you can't use it. The max amount that I recommend mixing at once, so mine goes up to 30 milliliters. I don't want to mix that much at once because it's going to like pour out the sides of my cup. So the max that I do at a time is 20 milliliters so that I have a little extra room for mixing. Depending on what cups you have though, I would just say give yourself like extra room. And then depending on what you're doing. So 20 milliliters is also the max that I like to do because reasonably how fast I can pour with the allotment of 40 minutes as my working time, I just don't want to waste. So I'll always like under mix because I can always mix another batch if I need to. And unfortunately that does add more time, but I hate wasting the resin. And unfortunately it does happen sometimes where you waste the resin and that's that. You get a lot out of what you have. Like I don't even know how many earrings I can get out of these 2 bottles of resin, like hundreds of earrings. Like you can get so much out of it. So it's very like cost efficient. Anyway, I hope that answers everyone's questions there. Yeah, so basically just giving yourself extra room for mixing because if not, you might pour over the sides. And that just creates a mess that no one wants. Of course, if you're into making messes, then honestly, the world is your oyster. So, all right, I'm going to start pouring this guy. All right, do one last little mix here. So as you can see, I do have like a decent amount of air bubbles in there. They're really small, but I will pop those with my heat gun. And then also I like to say like let it sit for a little bit because if you start pouring right as you finish mixing, it's going to be super runny and it's really easy to over pour into your pieces. So I like to give it a little bit just so it has a little bit of time to harden up just a little bit. Because if not, it's like pouring just like liquid. And then I'm going to move this so you guys can see what I'm doing. Hopefully that stays. I'm gonna pour over here. I usually stand as I'm doing this, just so I can get like a good angle. See it okay? Try to do it from the side. So definitely look at my iPhone camera right now, not the computer camera. I'm gonna pour some in. Like I said, little goes a long way. Never, with pieces this small, I would never say pre-pour it just from the cup. You want to use your stick to kind of spoon it in. Otherwise, you're going to end up with way too much in your pieces. And also, like, it's better to pour a little at first because you're going to put your piece in and then put some more in. You really don't have to put that much resin in at first. So like I said, a little goes a very long way. This is how much I still have in here. I still have quite a bit. And I'm just going to kind of mix it around, cover my whole piece. My hand out of the way. And as you see, I didn't do this one in the corner here with the hoops. So that's the one that I'm going to show you with paint really quick. Now that I have them all spread out within the piece, I can use my heat gun. All right, of course, this one has a low and a high setting. Low, always low, because you're using this on plastic underneath. So
you're a little away from your microphone, Erin.
What's that?
You're away from your microphone. We couldn't hear that last part about the temperature.
Sorry. With the heat gun, always on the low setting, not on the high setting, because you're gonna be applying this. It's gonna hit plastic, and you don't want your edges of the tape to curl up, and you don't want to get right next to it. You want to give it some space. So I have it on low. And I'm just gonna kind of gently, as you can see, I'm giving it space. I'm not like right up next to it. Sometimes you have to do it a couple times. You got to be patient.
And you can pretty much just see the bubbles go away?
Yep. You're probably not going to be able to see it from the angle I have you at, but
we'll take your word for it.
Yeah. I can try and lift up my phone. See if I can give you a better visual.
Yeah, they look really clear.
So as you can see, I got too close to that piece and the tape curled up.
Oh, okay, yep.
The rest of them, I'm keeping a nice distance. Looks like most of my air bubbles are gone. So I'm gonna set you down for a sec. Get you back on here. Sorry, I'm probably giving you guys whiplash right now. All right, and then I'm gonna put my pieces in. So I just take the sticky end of my stir stick to use to pick up my flowers. I'm gonna put this guy and this one. So the brass bindings that I'm using, as you can see, I'm getting flowers that fit into it. So for a piece this small, you're not going to want a super big flower. You kind of have to proportionally know what's going to work. And this itty bitty fern is going to go in here. Same thing with these itty bitty ferns, are going to go in these small little circles. And then as I'm putting it in, I'm just kind of taking my stir stick and then covering the leaf with the resin. So we want the resin to completely coat the whole flower. So this one, I'm just going to need a little bit of more resin. Kind of swirl it around on top to coat it. I'm coating the whole flower. We don't want any gaps. And then I'm also going to cover the brass as well. Here, let me get you a little closer so you can see what I'm doing. Usually I do it right in the fume box, but for these purposes, I'll show you here. This one I haven't done yet on the left, so I'm coating the flower. All covered in resin, and I'm actually going to go on the edge and paint the outline of the grass and spread the resin over that as well. The reason I do that is because if it does not...
We lost your iPhone.
Oh, sorry. Battery low. All right, there we go. So if I don't do that, this just gives it a better sturdy way to stay in the piece. If you don't do that, the piece could pop out. And of course, we don't want the flower piece to pop out. So this way it's fully encapsulated in the brass outline. Painting the edges. Making sure the flowers are centered where I want them. Make sure I covered the whole thing. And I'll put it back in here. It's also not a bad idea if you're doing that to check that you don't have any fuzzies in there. you do, then just fish it out with your little pin that you have. Does anyone have any questions right now?
Does the resin self-level at all?
I didn't catch that.
Does the resin sort of self-level?
Is it self-level?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Yep. So it'll kind of, you know, work its way so that
okay,
it's
thank
flat.
you.
As long as your tape is flat, it should. If you have it where my like edges are curled on one of those pieces on the tape, it might not do it as well. But yes, since it's liquid, it'll kind of simmer its way flat. All right, and then I'm gonna show you guys, I'm gonna do these two pieces real quick. Yes, another good thing to make sure is you're working on a flat surface. There was one time that I was working on the very edge of my table. This is an old table that has like a leaf at the end. It kind of tilts a little bit, so my pieces were like having more resin at the bottom than at the top. So that's also something good to do, is make sure you're on a level surface, since it does self-level itself. And again, less is more. You'd be surprised how little you need to coat the pieces on the top. Little goes a very long way.
So how often does the flour get messed up when you're trying to then coat the resin over the top?
Well, actually, it just happened. So this one here, and this is what I mean about pieces sticking together, because it makes like super annoying. So these two pieces stuck together, and actually this flour right here, you can see a couple little petals came off.
Yeah.
Which happens, the flowers that I source, it happens a lot less because they use some sort of like stiffening spray on the flowers. So it kind of helps it keep its shape better. But honestly, it just kind of adds to the character when that happens. So you can see here, there's like a little bit of a gap of some petals missing. And I just leave it like, I don't know. I think it shows that they're real flowers, so they're not all going to be perfect. Some are going to have brown spots on the petals. I like ones that have characters. I've had customers that are like, oh, I don't like this one because it has like a gap in the petals. And I'm like, well, they're real flowers, so that's going to happen sometimes. So
nature grows it the way it wants to grow.
Right, exactly. All right. Do I have time to show you some colored resin, or are we running out of time?
Well, we'll stick around as long as you want to like entertain us.
Okay. I just have a couple more things to show you. So basically, whenever I decide to do colored resin, I'll usually take another cup and pour into it, just so I'm not coloring all of the resin, because I usually don't want too much of it for the colored resin. Because like I said, a little goes a long way. I'm going to pour this in here. And then we'll do a colored resin. I'm actually going to put a piece of tape, my fabric here, so that I don't get fuzzies in my tape. And then I'll mix on the tape right here. Same thing with paint. Don't pour like a ton out. I just have like a little blob of black. The more you use, the more opaque it's gonna be. You don't want to use too much paint, otherwise it won't be resin anymore, you know. So you don't want to use a ton. I'm actually gonna pour some more. The bane of my existence is when things stick to my tape that I don't want to. A little bit more blue. Same thing, you kind of want to get all along the sides so it's well mixed. And honestly, you can tell when it's not well mixed because it's going to look super uneven, like the color's darker in certain spots. Or if your paint is clumpy, there might be clumps of paint in there, which you don't want. I'm just going to use a little bit of black because it's looking a little less navy. I really want to do like a dark navy. So it's better to start with a little paint and then keep adding more as you need. Because once you add too much, it's going to get really, really thick and really hard to mix and then pour into your piece. Add a little bit more black. Now we're really getting more of like a navy tone here. So I'm going to pour. Same thing, I'm going to spoon it in. Got a nice dollop of resin in there. Kind of mix it around. Try to be careful when I mix with the colored resins so as not to get it on the outline. So I don't want my outline to turn a different color. The metal outline, the hoop. There we go. Here's what it looks like. So you can see it's pretty transparent. So I would usually do it much more opaque than this. But some people like the transparent look. I like the really opaque look because then the flower, the leaf really sticks out. Whenever you hold it up to the light though, it's always gonna look more transparent. So that's kind of what that looks like. And then I would go in and pop the air bubbles. And one last technique I want to show you here. For the resin. And then if people have to go, that's totally fine. I realize it's 7:30. I'm just going to show you really quick how I paint the resin on my ginkgos. So I'm gonna place my ginkgo leaf on the wax paper. You can also place it on a sheet protector. I usually would place it on a sheet protector. All right, sorry, my phone wants to die on me. Plug it back in.
So do you do anything more? These those ones that you've done, do they just like now dry and then you're completely done? You don't have to put it.
Yes. I will show you how I drill holes in it. For anyone who wants to stick around, it's super fast. It's not difficult.
Okay.
So I'll just show you really quick how I paint the ginkgo. So I use just a little bit, and then you basically just paint it to cover it. You want to make sure that when you do this step, your resin is not runny. Because if it's runny, it's gonna go over the sides of the leaf, and it's not gonna give you the look you want. You want to be extra careful and just paint up to the edge. So this technique is called doming, actually. Fancy, has a name for it. So you kind of just like let it dome, the resin dome up to the edge so that it doesn't go past. It doesn't pour over the edge and then make all this extra resin on the sides that you don't want, because it will dry like that. So this technique is a little bit more advanced, it takes a little bit more practice, and you really have to know the viscosity of your resin in order to do this stuff. You kind of have to plan it out, because you want enough resin at the end if you're planning to do pieces like this, so that you can have the viscosity, the thicker viscosity you need to do this. So that is looking pretty good.
So do you only do one side of the ginkgo, or do you have to wait till it dries and then do?
Yep, you do one side at a time, because if you do the back side, you're gonna get these weird air bubbles that you don't want. Because no matter how hard you try to press them, they're not gonna lay completely flat, and you're just bound to get air bubbles. So I do one side at a time. So I'll let it dry like this, and then when I do the back side, I'll take a little piece of wire and I'll put a little eye pin at the top. I used to do it where I would do the front, let it dry, do the back, let it dry, and then I would use my Dremel drill to drill a hole in it. But I found that when I was drilling into the actual leaves and flowers, it was messing up the look. So it didn't look as nice. So now I've started doing it with these. So I call these my frameless pieces, because they don't have any middle outline with them. When I do the frameless pieces, I try my best not to do any drilling into it. Because when you're drilling just into resin, it doesn't affect the color. So like on these pieces here, I'm gonna drill a little hole in the top and it's not gonna go through the flower. But on these ones, I would have to drill directly into the leaf. And it messes with the color of the leaf. So it kind of discolors it a little bit. Because
so the
obviously when you're using a Dremel, it gets, what's that?
The resin holds the eye pin to the leaf then?
Yep, you just add a little extra resin on top to kind of coat it, and then it should stay. I mean, obviously you shouldn't be super rough with it. You should be nice to your resin pieces. But yeah, generally it will hold as long as your resin is like, it's pretty hardy. It can withstand a lot. So all right, I am going to show you guys how I drill holes really quick, and then I think I'm done. So I'm going to get this out of the way. I do have a little bit of extra resin right now, but for demonstration purposes, that's okay. So I'm going to get my take off my gloves now, since I'm only working with dried pieces. I'm gonna switch you this angle. Take my cloth out. All right, so I have a couple pieces that are pre-dried to show you guys how I do this. And if anyone needs to head out, like totally fine.
Your website, you have full line of all your different flower earrings and stuff on your website now?
Say that again?
You have your earrings and stuff on your website now?
Yes. I am in the process of adding more because of the holiday. I have taken like a little break recently, so I'm getting back to it this week before I go on vacation, and then once I'm back from vacation, I'll be adding a ton more. So it's kind of just a weird timing for my business right now. All right, so this is a piece that's all dried that I worked on. So it's got a little, I'm actually not sure what type of leaf that is, but it's got these little fronds in here, and it's all dry, and it's still attached to the tape. So basically you just want to go kind of slow as you're taking the tape off. But as long as it's dry and you did a good job with your resin, the piece shouldn't pop out at all. So it looks like it's hard, but it's really not. Take the tape off. You can see I've got some extra resin around the edges, so where it kind of spilled out. Usually you can just peel it right off.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you super over poured, you might have to go in and sand it off. I try to avoid that whenever possible though, because sanding can be a little trickier. So yep, I'm just taking it right off.
Wow.
And if you need to, if it's still a little uneven, you can go in with an X-Acto knife and just kind of fix up the edges. A little bit uneven right here, so I'm kind of going in. But yeah, this part is super easy as long as you do a good job with pouring your resin. Of course, if you were like pretty messy and you spilled out a lot, then it might be a little bit more difficult. And I'll just show you quick how I drill a hole. Use this piece here. So this is a chrysanthemum necklace that I'm doing. I'm actually going to go in and use an X-Acto knife on the edges. So I have a little bit of extra resin right here. And then the flower was actually just a tiny bit too big for this pendant. So I'm going to go in and just kind of take the little edges of the petals off that are spilling over the edge.
So do you have an art school background, or how did you get into this?
I actually went to school for fashion design. I am not using any of my skills that I learned in college. This is all YouTube taught. So, of course, it's a lot of trial and error too. And of course, like, I'm sure my background it helps, you know, like the fact that I'm like crafty and I know how to work with my hands. And then just, you know, having an education background is,
well, you learn color
for owning a business,
and you learn all kinds of things in art school that you never
What's that?
Would be relative.
Yeah.
Say that again.
You learn all kinds of crazy things in art school that you never thought would be relative, you know.
Right, yeah. I learned how to crochet a little bit in like one of my classes at school, but I didn't learn anything with jewelry making. We didn't do jewelry. So this is all self-taught with the jewelry. And then the crocheting that we learned was just like very beginner stuff. It wasn't like really how to make anything. It was just how to do like simple stitches and stuff. Okay, so I've cleaned up this edge here, these edges here, and I'm just gonna go in and pop a little hole on the top so I can put a jump ring in it to attach it to a necklace chain. Yes, it is fashion. We didn't do any classes on jewelry though. Like, would have been a useful thing to learn, I think.
You didn't make accessories in your fashion school?
Nothing we were taught. We didn't learn that. I did a little bit of millinery, so hat making.
Yep.
But nothing that I was taught in school. So it's kind of things you learned on your own. YouTube is school, I think. So this is my Dremel. It's really nice. You can get different bits to put in the top. So this is what I use for drilling holes. I use a pretty small drill bit, as you can see, that is tiny, tiny.
And what kind of drill bit works for resin? Is it just a normal wood bit or a diamond bit or what?
So I would say specifically Dremel, stick with Dremel brand, not to just be like advertising them, but so Dremels specifically, their bits aren't super long. They're shorter bits. So the longer bit you have, the more likely it's gonna break on you. So the Dremel drill bits are shorter, which is nice. I do have other ones, but they jut out pretty far. And yeah, they're just like regular like wood drill bits. But these ones are specifically Dremel brand. This is my Dremel case here. So it's got a bunch of different accessories you can get with it. So this one is for sanding. So if you ever need to sand your edges, this is what you'd use. These are for buffing. So actually, if I ever get hairs in my pieces, I'll actually just use the buffer to get it out. Because sanding it might degrade your resin too much. And one thing you do have to be careful with is because when you're drilling, it does get hot. So when you're sanding, you need to be careful that your resin doesn't reheat itself. And it makes a really foul smell when it does that. I wouldn't say it ruins your piece, but you have to be careful. Because it'll get like hot to the touch. Like I've burned myself because of it. Yeah, that's mostly what I use. This is a different type of sanding piece. These ones aren't really for jewelry. They're way too abrasive. Yeah, so that's really all I use. This is another sanding one if I need to do something more fine. Focus.
Erin, where did you get your Dremel?
I believe I got mine from Lowe's. You can get them
really?
as like a unit with like a bunch of different accessories. I think you can buy the drill by itself. I would definitely say at least get their drill bit accessories, because that's, you know, how you drill holes.
Well, I had a Dremel and the battery won't recharge anymore.
Oh,
and
no.
And I looked around and all they had was corded ones.
Oh,
so I see you have
that one.
Yeah.
I think you can get them at most hardware stores. If not, I think probably
Home
online.
Depot.
What's that?
Home Depot has them.
The cordless
Depot,
ones?
Ace Hardware
I think so.
If you have Ace Hardwares. I'd say Lowe's is probably your best bet, but
are the cones stone, or are they are those cones that you said you use, are they stone or are they soft?
These ones here?
Yeah.
These are hard. Yeah.
Yeah, they're stone.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, and these are going to be more like the fabric plush. So this is more for buffing. I would say you never want to buff the surface of your resin unless you need to get something out of it. Buffing it isn't going to make it shinier. It's just going to ruin your resin. So I wouldn't, it's going to look nice and polished just the way that it dries unless you get something in it. So yeah, it's not to like it's not to buff resin at all, because you're just going to be reheating the resin and then making it messy. So this is a regular drill bit. And as you can see, it's quite a bit longer.
Yep.
So you have more chance of breakage. So I really do recommend the Dremel drill bits. You can also get some off of Amazon that are suitable for Dremels, but I got those and they broke right away. I'm not really a huge fan of Amazon in general, so I try to avoid it if I can. But that's just my experience with it. So I'm going to get a little mat on here, my super messy mat that I've gotten a bunch of resin on. And then I'm just going to drill a little hole in here. I find if I just crank up the speed a little bit, so there's like different speeds, I don't go all the way to the top, but I do it right about at like 10 to 15. I find the lower it is, the more likely chance you have it messing up. So, because if you're going in at a faster speed, there's less chance that it's going to kind of wiggle on you. So I like to go right about at 10. When it starts up, get a better angle for you guys. And then, of course, just be careful. But yeah, super easy. So now I have a little hole at the top. It's going to make a little bit of resin dust for you. Also important, if you're done with resin, pouring resin, still wear a mask if you're drilling resin, because it's going to create the resin dust that comes up in your face. So, I mean, same as just like drilling in general, you want to wear a mask. And then I have a little hole up there that I can put a jump ring through. And then as long as your drill bit is big enough for your jump ring, it'll go through easily. So just make sure that if you have a super thick jump ring, you want a thicker drill bit. I use, I think like 20 gauge jump ring. So this will fit through perfectly. But that is it. Does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry I went over time. There's a lot of stuff with resin.
Nobody's gonna complain about more information.
Okay. We tried to keep it under
Erin,
time, but
Erin,
yeah.
Have you ever used your components, your frames that already come with the loop on the top?
Yes. So I can kind of show
And do you have a preference? I mean, as opposed to drilling,
I don't really mind drilling. It can go very fast once you're like comfortable with it. You can kind of see here. So this one has a little hole at the top already preset. Depending on the resin, I do often get resin in the hole, so I still have to drill in it. I think I do have, yes, I can show you. I do have some that have like little hoops on the top. So like this piece here has a little hoop on the top. So a lot of times I don't actually have to drill for this one. But yeah, just depends on what you can find and source. I don't make any of my metal pieces. I source them all because I don't have time to make them. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's just a thought. Thanks.
Thank you.
The question, does the resin work on stone too? Was a question. The resin, can you put it on stone?
No. You can put resin on, it's like such a multifaceted material. People use it on wood to varnish. Jewelry is great because it's more of a preservative for jewelry. Yeah, I mean, for like a stone table or whatever you're using, yeah, I think you could use it. I would test it out maybe small scale, make sure that it doesn't, the only thing with stone, depending on like how smooth it is, you might get some air bubbles. That would be my only thing. But if you have a heat gun, you can make that problem go away. So yes.
Oh, someone said seal.
Yes, sorry, I almost forgot. Seal the stone first and then the care of resin jewelry. So resin is pretty simple to take care of. The biggest thing is you don't want to give it a ton of UV exposure. So if you have them, like, this is just an example I give to customers, like in the summer, if you're like going in the pool and you take them out, like don't leave them like out in the light, because that's what can cause yellowing. I tell people you can wear them on a hot day because it's not often like you're moving enough that it's just going to be like beating down on it the whole time. But yeah, as much like little UV exposure as you can. And then I tell people like put them in a box so they're not just like sitting out. And then microfiber for cleaning any oils you get on it. You can also put water and then the microfiber cloth. Usually I don't use soap on it. You really need water to clean off. Yeah, what else? I try to keep them from like bumping into other pieces of earrings because scratching can be an issue. So if you drop them on the floor, I'd say resin is pretty hardy. Like it's not going to break easily, but it can scratch. So to answer the question of how hard the finished surface is, it is like it's hard. But if I take my fingernail and really dig in with it, I can scratch it. So it's not like it gives the look of glass, but it's not like glass in the fact that like it's anti-scratch. Does anyone else have any questions? Was that a question at the end?
So
that was just a recommendation.
Windows. So like making like sun things for hanging in windows, that resin's not recommended for that because it would yellow over time.
Yeah, I did actually watch a video by Amazing Clear Cast. It was like their brand that made a YouTube video on how to make a stained glass window. And I was like, that doesn't seem like it would last super long. But because their brand is non-yellowing technically, I think that's why they promoted it as doing that. But I don't know that I would recommend it for that, just because any resin can yellow over time. So I don't think I would use it for that.
There's a question, if it scratches, can you fix it?
You can try to use a microfiber to buff it, but if it's like in the surface, I wouldn't say so. You could also, I don't know, like sometimes if I use the buffer, I can buff really, really lightly to try and fix a scratch, and I find it doesn't do anything. So depending on how like deep the scratch is, probably not.
You couldn't like take a new layer of resin and throw it over the top? Oh, we lost your voice. Erin, we can't hear you. We lost your camera voice. Erin, we can't hear you. Hello, we lost your camera voice. We lost your other camera.
Oh, my phone died. That's
yeah, that's what I was saying. You're switch your voice. Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I had my volume down. Sorry, I have my phone plugged in, but apparently it wasn't charging fast enough, so I'm glad it died when it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, good timing. Yes, any other questions?
Okay, so it does say adding a thin layer over a new one will cover scratches.
So, sorry, I might have gotten cut off with the phone.
Yeah, you did. So that was the part. Okay.
So in the case where like a customer scratches something, I don't think I've had anyone do this because for the most part, I think my customers are pretty good about taking care of their stuff, or it's something that they just don't notice.
Right. Hang your earrings up when you're done wearing them. Don't just throw them in your jewelry box in a pile.
If if you go to the gym, do not just like throw it in your bag, because that will, especially because I use other, like say with this piece, I'll use this one as a good example. So this piece has this like pretty rough edge, like kind of spiky.
Yeah, it's like an eye.
Yeah, so it's like a little like sunburst evil eye. So I tell people, you know, like if you have one on top of the other and they like scratch each other, like it's best to hang them up or to put them nicely in a box by themselves. Yeah, and when I do package my jewelry to send to people, it comes in its own box. So I'm like, just put it back in the box nicely. Just don't like throw them around. So yeah, I think a lot of it is like pretty common sense. The most of it is just like the scratching and then the non-yellowing, not everyone knows about. So yeah.
It's so cool. I mean, it sounds like a lot of detail, but you know, once you get all set up, you know, I think it just.
Yeah, it's not too hard if you have the right materials. It takes patience for sure. Like when I first started, I was not super accurate with my proportions. So I definitely had some bad batches of resin. And if you don't mix well enough, like even like this summer, I had a bad batch of resin. And in the case that you do have a bad batch of resin, depending, you might be able to fix it. You might not just have to toss it. You could do another layer over it. In that case, I don't know if I recommend doing that. If it's just a few pieces, you could fix them like that. But if it's a big batch, it's like might kind of compromise the pieces. So I don't know that I recommend doing that, but I've done it and it's been okay. Because then you're basically covering up the bad resin with better, like basically if the resin doesn't cure properly, it stays tacky. It doesn't turn hard. And of course, if it's tacky and sticky, it's kind of gross. So yeah, best place to find out when you are at farmer's market. Notice of your pop-ups. Yes, so follow me on Instagram at the Retro Collective Co. So
sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. And it's all lowercase, no symbol or anything.
Right. Sorry, I typed it wrong. Retro.
That's my name, and then kind of like this little rainbow swirly thing.
Collective Co. There we go.
So the farmer's market is in the summer. We actually have a long season though. We start end of April and go till end of October. So it's actually like a 6-month summer season. So we don't start up till April. I did just finish with a bunch of pop-ups with the holidays. Come January, February, a lot of retail businesses slow down a bit. So I don't know that there's going to be, I don't have any pop-ups scheduled at the moment. I'm hoping.
So your website, is it just the retrocollectiveco.com?
Yes. Yep. Super simple. Really easy to remember. You don't even have to type in like www. It'll take you right there. And I am updating it very soon. So there should be more stuff. So since I don't have a pop-up anytime soon, actually the stuff that I had set aside for markets, I'm going to add on there this week. And then I am going to make so I have these beads from Bobby Bead, marbled stone beads, which is where I kind of got the navy tone. So I'm going to use those with the navy collection this week. And then do a release of those as well. Yes.
I'm just curious, how long have you been working with resin?
I started January of 2020, so really not that long.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, just start playing and you know, you'll be a pro in no time.
Yeah. I was not a pro at first, but you learn the techniques, and there's things that work for some people and things that people have said to me that I'm like, oh, I've never even thought of that. So people have their own little things that work for them. So yeah.
So exciting. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
for joining us. We really, really appreciate it.
Sorry I went over time. I was like worried I was going to have enough to talk about, but of course this is what happens. So.
Well, we love hearing and seeing it all. And so thank you so much. And we look forward to, yeah, I have a pair of, I forgot to wear them today. I was so late running to work. I apologize, but I have a beautiful fern pair that I got last summer and I love them.
I only wear mine when I sell at the markets because while I'm working, I don't wear earrings.
We all forget, right? And so thank you so much. And I hope to see everybody on the 15th for our fairy party. And so have a good night, everybody.
Thanks so much, you guys.